You recently were talking about Pratyahara, and I wondered if we could talk a little bit more about that because I have questions. First of all, what is Pratyahara?
Sage Patanjali is a yogic sage, quite renowned worldwide, has given a 8-limbed path of yoga. It begins with yama niyamas, which are societal and personal rules of conduct, which are ethical based in dharma. Then there is asana, which we all know very well, the yogic postures. Then there is pranayama, breath control. Then there is pratyahara, which is a conscious effort to become inward. So it's the 5th limb, followed by the last 3, which are more and more meditative. So it is dhyana, beginning meditation, dharana, holding the meditation, and samadhi, experiencing union with the inner consciousness, which is the final stage of meditation. So in short, pratyahara is the 5th limb of Patanjali's 8-path Ashtanga Yoga. It is a spiritual practice recommended because the beginning limbs, the first 4, are said to be the outer limbs of yoga, dealing with the world, dealing with our daily habits, dealing with our physical asanas and physical breath. And the last 3 are inward meditative states. So pratyahara is somewhere in the middle, which the deepened breath takes us deep into the state of inwardness, conscious inwardness of the senses, of the mind, and of our actions. You can see that it would have a benefit on our later meditative journeys to come up.
Definitely. Is there so the difference between there are, reining in the senses as part of the yamas and niyamas as well. And so if I understand what you're saying is that it differs from those very basic in the world prescriptions to sort of balancing between that more subtle quality. What's the difference between reining? Because often it's described as reining in the senses. That's Pratyahara is described online as the reining in the senses, but it sounds like there's something more to it than that.
I think yama and niyamas such as do not steal, do not be violent, do not lie. These are more like general moral prescriptions that we have to follow to be part of a conscious society, to do our part in a conscious society. And it includes not only sense management, but it really includes the ability to follow a prescription, do's and don'ts laid out by great seers. But when we talk about pratyahara, we are really talking about our personal senses and their tendency to roam out in the world and carry with them an inclination. So we may be very kind and we don't steal, and we may be non-violent, and we may be leading beautiful lives, but still we have an outward tendency. And the mind is constantly moving outwards into the world, and the cognitive senses are bringing in input, touch input, visual stimuli, auditory stimuli, a smell stimuli. And so all these stimuli are entering us without asking our permission. They may be good stimuli, but there's still a lot of noise. And when we want to go into those deep meditative states to encounter our deeper consciousness and more expansive state of awareness, we want to minimize the noise or even cut it out completely. And as a result, pratyahara is a practice that's taken up by someone who already got their moral act together, purportedly, but are now wanting to calm their individual brain, their personal mind and nervous system. And that is why in the sadhana path, or the second chapter of the Patanjali Sutras, the Pratyahara practice has been described as Swa-Vishaya Samprayoge. Typically, we go for other Vishayas or objects. We're always, going for the trillions of objects in the world that come in through our senses uninvited. But Swa-Vishaya means, so now that they're not going outwards, they make the Swa, the self, as the Vishaya, as the object to descend upon. So there is not only an inward movement, but an inner anchoring on the pure mind reflecting the self. Because why is the mind pure now? Because it's not clouded and polluted with so many Vishayas or objects of the world. And that is why the senses are no longer, the eyes are no longer what they see, the ears are no longer what they hear, but they have come into the original Swarupa, or the original form of the crystal clear mind that is shining with the light of consciousness. It's a beautiful invitation, and it has many benefits, not only for meditation, but for being able to really go within and find out some deeper potential within us, which is usually so clouded with a humming, buzzing mind.
Yeah. This opens up a few more questions, if I may. Okay, so we have this as this limb, this limb of yoga, as this major, a fundamental pillar of our spiritual path. Is it only on the mat? Do we only practice Pratyahara while we're on the mat, while we're in our, specifically our morning practice, or any time that we're doing yoga? Or is this something that, my assumption is that we work towards that to be able to even settle down to sit on a mat and contemplate meditation or contemplate calming ourselves down. So can you talk about, is Pratyahara the things we do in the world? Is it the things we do only in our private experience? What is it in that way?
Restraining and bringing back the senses and not allowing them to wander at will is definitely a practice to be practiced on the mat, so to say. So we have some special exercises. For example, for the eyes, we can keep looking at the lit flame of a candle or a deepak. And if our eyes want to wander, we keep bringing it back gently to the flame. So it trains the eyes to do our bidding and not go here and there. Similarly, we can go on listening to that inner chant of Om. That's one way to focus the mind and the ears. So there's so many ways that we can practice from a sadhana perspective, Pratyahara, but it would be a very limiting assumption to think that Pratyahara can only be practiced for 5 minutes a day, while the rest of the time our 5 cognitive senses and our 5 expressive senses are having a riot. Rather, it is in the day-to-day whirlwind of life and relationships that we want to train our senses, our mind, and our intellect to practice Pratyahara. And that is why there are types of Pratyahara. For example, there is the Pratyahara of the senses. So during our given day, we fast from foods or compulsive eating or snacking or overeating, talking too much, constantly scrolling on the phone, constantly needing to touch a comfort item, constantly needing to have sexual contact or any other compulsive behaviors is a way to rein in the indriyas or the senses. Similarly, sometimes we are breathing too fast or not at all or not exhaling, and practicing rhythmic, harmonious, deep, slow, intentional breathing where the breath expands the belly and then contracts the belly. There is a mindfulness around breath is prana-based pratyahara. Then there is the karma or action-based pratyahara. To even sit in asana, any kind of asana, boat pose, dog pose, downward dog pose, any of those, it's a kind of a pratyahara. Not making the body move at will, but to be still in a certain position. Really, asana can be addressed not just as an exercise, but as a form of pratyahara. Offering seva, selfless service to others using our hands and legs, is a kind of pratyahara, because otherwise the hands and legs only want to serve the self, or people it considers as extensions of the self, but none others. Upasana, prayer, lighting the lamp, moving the incense towards non-tangible divine forces, is also a kind of pratyahara. Acting without selfish interest and acting without controlling the results, the essence of karma yoga, is also pratyahara. And then finally, there is the mind-based pratyahara, where a thought occurs, an idea occurs, like I'm a loser, and pull ourselves back from that thought. I'm a great person, pull ourselves back from that. Really refusing to become modified by any thought is a pratyahara, a coming back, a coming back. And Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita has given a beautiful, beautiful example of people who live in this state, and they are like the turtle who has his limbs out in the world to move, to navigate, but at his will, whenever he feels it's too much, he can pull them back in. So it's not necessarily a fear response of the turtle, but a discerned response of when should I be out there and when should I pull my limbs in. Similarly, when a person is shivering and cold, they have a tendency to wrap their arms around themselves and kind of huddle up. It's like pulling in. That's the kind of visual imagery I want to create. Like we could be in the middle of a noisy room or a party or a press conference, and instead of being all out there with all our gates open for transaction, with or without our voluntary participation, we could be in a bit more huddled in or conservative energy mode. And so then we become automatically more discerning. The filters are on of what do we believe in and what do we not believe in. Even as we are watching news or being part of a group which is talking without filters on, maybe gossips going on, we could be in an inwardly pratyahar mode of, I'm not letting this touch me. It's almost like our self pulls us in, almost like I would give the example of a child, a toddler moving towards the fire. They're about to put their hands in it, and the mother grabs the child and pulls it close and makes it safe. In the same way, our self, the higher sovereign part of us, pulls back our intellect, our ego, our mind and senses, and huddles it back. It says, don't go there. Don't spend time there. That's where you will become vulnerable to false ideas, wrong habits, bad company, sorrowful attachments, and self-sabotaging addictions that will pull you down. So pratyahara for the everyday person brings them into their natural power and sovereignty. And for a yogi, it's almost a compulsory stage to go for any person who's a sadhaka, who's into sadhana, who's a bhakta, who's into devotion or bhakti, or a yogi who's trying to meditate. If you've not done pratyahara, you've not even closed the doors of your being, and all kinds of stuff is coming in. what are you trying to achieve then when you sit down and close your eyes and chant or meditate? So it's a preliminary stage to meditation then for the yogis and the sadhakas.
Thank you. That really clarified a few things for me personally. Also, what you just said, this last part, even around that this is a beginning stage for meditation, because I think so many times there's this, I was saying it earlier, we were talking, and if we have all these 8 limbs, and here in the West we're only practicing the one asana, it's like we're hopping around we're hopping around on one limb, expecting ourselves to be able to stand stable on the non-existent 8. And so this is a really key, this pratyahara is a really key learning for me as well. And I think that this idea, and I'm trying to apply it in my own life, of, am I engaged in the world, but with that withdrawn, so still part of the world, still observing, still connecting, and yet withdrawing the power of the world to dictate where my senses go, pulling them in and just working on this practice more and more, and where it often comes up as things like social media or the news. And what is my obligation to engage, and what is my obligation to serve my higher self? And this is a dynamic that I'm working on. I imagine a lot of your students are as well, navigating that. But it sounds to me like you're saying that there's this higher obligation, for one, towards, if we are a sadhaka, if we are one who is on the spiritual path, there's a higher obligation to ourself, but also what you said just kind of flies in the face of a sort of this underlying theme of, we're not being socially responsible if we aren't fully engaging in the world. And I think that's a confusion that many people that are wanting to serve in the world run into. Would you be able to speak on how to navigate that? We want to be of service, we want to be karma yogis, and yet without this ability to rein in our senses, I can speak from my own experience that it's very easy to get lost in that world that we're trying to help. Would you talk on that?
As citizens of Earth, we all have some form of housing. It could be a house, it could be a condo, an apartment, a room we rent. And we are all engaged with each other in a social, intellectual context. And we are often there for each other, as we should be. Yoga does not demand radical separation from the world. Pratyahara does not mean living in some remote isolation. But just as we live in houses and yet we are part of a community, it is an obligation for us to engage with the community. And at the same time, it is expected of us that when we come out of our houses, we would lock the doors. At nighttime, we might drop the blinds. In the morning, if the weather is nice, we'll open the curtains. There is a choice here. We don't leave everything open and wide for dust and even dangerous beasts to enter our home when we are not paying attention. In the same way, these are not two opposites. Pratyahara is not the opposite of worldly life. Pratyahara is an invitation to lead a more discerning worldly life. And if we want to, from time to time, be able to leave the world outside to its own business and take a sojourn inward, then it has to be part of a daily practice. Someone like myself who practices pratyahara on the mat and in the world, is the head of several organizations, is on many communities, is an advisor to the government of India. We work towards social justice and noble causes. And perhaps I work in them from a more discerned place, not a place that is morphed and shaped and panicked and put into fear by the world, but from a more original place. And I'm often appreciated for original insights and ideas. That's because I'm not living in the discotheque of a nervous system, but I'm living in the calm sanctuary of my brain, and my nervous system supports me and does not drive me from one habit to another, from one mindless consumption to another, from one triggered anxiety attack to another. So really, Pratyahara is, I would say, even an helpful practice for those who want greater mental health, more inner emotional sovereignty, and more ability to guide their own destiny.
Thank you. Is it possible to have enlightenment, to find enlightenment without pratyahara?
No. Then you talk about it and you follow trends and you're happy or unhappy based on what's happening out there, which your sense organs and your organs of actions are either in bringing in to make you feel a certain way or acting upon them, which then has consequences for you to bear. If there is no sense of separation to recalibrate your energy, to redesign your map, to change direction, to follow the real teacher this time, or to read the book from cover to cover slowly rather than just finishing it. All those choices are possible only after you are someone who has pratyahara in place. Otherwise, your taste for rum might take you down an alley that you didn't want to go. Your penchant for chili peppers might change the quality of your mind, and you never really realize what is true peace. Your desire to always touch comfortable satin when you sleep will prevent you from traveling to some beautiful areas of the world. You're just trapped by the nest of comforts and compulsions created by non-stop stimuli. So pratyahara is the ability to tell your senses that I'm the master and I'm going to decide what are we going to do today and for the rest of our life in this moment too. If you can say no to something that's tremendously delicious because you have self-control, then you can say no to a seductive companion, though you want one, and save yourself a lot of suffering down the road. And if you can say no to a sleazy companion who looks like their dream come true, then you can say no to a false guru and see through them. And then you can say no to a life that is just wasted in the pursuit of spirituality and truly lead a spiritual, wholesome, and abundant life. It all begins with knowing when to open your doors and when to close the doors. And that is Pratyahara.
Thank you, Shanji. So grateful.